Order. Order. Dr. Ros Savage to move the motion.
I'd like to move that this House has considered e-petition 700765 relating to compensation for women affected by state pension changes. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Edward, and to introduce this e-petition on behalf of the Petitions Committee. I'd like to thank the petitioners for making this debate possible and all the WASPI campaigners for their tireless efforts, especially Jane Cowley, Angela Madden and Debbie Despon. The government's refusal to compensate WASPI women is both shocking and disheartening. The Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman found clear maladministration in the Department for Work and Pensions communication of state pension age changes and recommended that each affected woman should be awarded £2,950 as compensation. The facts of this are that despite a 15-year lead-in period, women were informed 21 years after the legislation passed, leaving many unaware of the impact on their retirement and their life plans. Shockingly, some women never received any notification at all. The DWP has yet to explain why they concluded that written notification was necessary and yet failed to provide it. The Ombudsman's instruction for Parliament to ensure compensation is extremely rare. The DWP's refusal to comply with these recommendations is almost unprecedented, occurring in less than 1% of cases. Over 200 MPs have criticised the government's inaction, including 50 Labour MPs.
Would the Honourable Lady give way?
I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way and I congratulate her on opening this important debate. 74% of the public support fair compensation for WASPI women. What does it say about this place and our democracy if when 74% of the public have that opinion, we don't act as a Parliament and give WASPI women fair compensation?
The honourable gentleman makes an extremely good point, and I do include that figure, that staggering amount of public support for WASPI compensation later on in my speech. Thank you. At least 80 ministers previously pledged support while in opposition, but somehow that support has not survived the transition into power. The 160,000 people who signed this petition feel betrayed. And, as already mentioned, it's worth noting that 74% of the public support compensation for WASPI women. I will give way.
And as the previous chair of the Petitions Committee, would she agree with me that 160,000 people signing a petition really does show the strength of feeling, and that as a committee, very few petitions that are started reach that threshold, and it's a testament to the commitment of WASPI campaigners?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and I do absolutely agree. The assumption that affected women should have monitored their pensions is deeply offensive. Like most normal people, they were focused on their lives, on their work and on their families. The oft-cited statistic that 90% of women knew about the changes is misleading. It comes from a 2006 survey about general awareness of possible future changes, not specific impacts on individuals. Only 5% of the respondents to that survey were 1950s-born women. The Ombudsman, in fact, found only 43% knew their pension age was 65. I will give way.
I'm very grateful for giving way. I congratulate her on securing this debate. But would she share my concern that there is a dangerous path we're going down, that the Ombudsman, having made a recommendation, that has been rejected? And does that not shake faith in the entire system of the Ombudsman?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention and agree that there is an egregious lack of transparency and accountability embedded at the heart of this particular case. I will give way.
Extraordinarily generous. Thank you, Sir Edward. But it's not just the Ombudsman where faith could be shaken. The public are rightly concerned that dozens, if not hundreds, of Labour members of Parliament previously supported the WASPI women and now, when they're in government, have turned their backs on them. This is not just about the Ombudsman. This is about parliamentary democracy and our constituents being able to have faith that what we say actually happens.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and now I will make some progress. As a result of these changes, between 6 and 15% of affected women have fallen into poverty. Recent surveys show that 84% worry about energy bills, 76% worry about their financial future, and 71% tragically avoid leaving their home to save money. I'd like to highlight the case of Marion Bond, one of my constituents in the South Cotswolds. During a lifetime spent as a teacher, Marion made many sacrifices, including turning down promotions and working part-time to care for her children while her husband worked long hours. Despite supporting his career, her divorce settlement was based on the assumption that she would receive her pension at 60. Instead, she unexpectedly faced a delay, losing 6 years of pension. The small compensation recommended by the Ombudsman is a fraction of the £40,000 that she calculates she has lost as a result of this lack of communication. And Marion's story is not unique. A survey on Facebook saying, "What would you have done differently?" yielded over 1,500 heart-rending stories as women shared how their lives would have been different with proper notification. These stories include escaping abusive relationships, continuing with much-loved careers rather than taking voluntary redundancy, and fulfilling care responsibilities for grandchildren or other relatives. While men and women should have equal retirement ages, that is not the issue here. The issue is the communication failure. The mishandled rollout of the change left many women stranded, facing unemployment and reliance on benefits. This in turn affected their mental and physical health and placed financial strain on their families, impacting childcare, social and healthcare sectors. This issue fundamentally questions how we value women in our society. We must recognise that women face invisible financial penalties due to gender, including pay gaps and unpaid labour burdens.
On that point, will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend giving way. She's giving a very powerful opening to this debate. She mentioned there the gender pay gap. That is the reason why we have a gender pension gap, is what I would suggest. And we know that that amounts to almost 40%. Does she agree with me that that is one of the other reasons why we need to be looking at WASPI women again, because of the lack of notification they had, means that this money means so much to so many of them?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention and for a good point, very well made. Women like Marion and the rest of the WASPI women have devoted their lives to raising the next generation, contributing significantly to our economy. Minister's claims that women experienced no financial loss are false. Women lost the opportunity to make informed decisions, leading to significant material losses. The compensation sought is not a benefits payment, but redress for an injustice, and as such should not be means tested, following precedents set by other government compensation schemes like the Windrush generation and the Post Office sub-postmasters. This debate centres on a core principle of good governance. When a department fails to fulfil its own policy, it has an obligation to those affected. The DWP's refusal to engage with victims or even consider compensation violates this principle. Further, the DWP has not even provided any reason for refusing compensation, demonstrating a deeply offensive lack of accountability. For many years, the Liberal Democrats have pushed the government to fairly compensate WASPI women in line with the Ombudsman's recommendations. I know that WASPI will continue to take all actions necessary to help 1950s-born women achieve justice through compensation, but only Parliament can actually make this happen. As we debate this petition, we must consider the role that the government plays in providing a safety net for the most vulnerable members of our society. I'm sure we'll hear many stories today of inspirational women who have served their communities, families and this country, who've been fundamentally let down by the British government. As we debate this petition, we must consider the government's role in providing a safety net for the most vulnerable. I also want to add that the clock is ticking. Over 300,000 1950s-born women have died since this campaign began, with, on average, another one passing away every 13 minutes. The solution is clear. The government must act now to compensate WASPI women fairly and swiftly. These women have served their communities, family and country, and it's time that we served them. Thank you.
I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. As we can see, there is a very large number of honourable members trying to take part. And therefore, if we're going to get everybody in, we must, with immediate effect, impose a 5-minute limit. And again, if we're going to get everybody in, I would ask you, please, to refrain as much as possible from interventions. So the question is that this House has considered e-petition 765 relating to compensation for women affected by state pension changes. And I call John Trickett.
Serve under your guidance, and I look forward to the debate. It's a pleasure too to thank the committee for arranging this debate, and let me pay tribute to the opening speech which was made, which was very, very powerful. And while I'm on the business of thanking people, let me thank the tens of thousands of WASPI women who I've met all over the country over the years fighting for what they seem to be justice, and I agree with them. And that organisation will not simply disappear. The government cannot simply ignore them. They will not be allowed to ignore them. And the allies and friends in this place too, many across the House today, who will work with the WASPI women too to try to secure justice. And let me just say, first of all, I voted the other day for the reimbursement of the WASPI women. I did so with two thoughts in my mind, only two thoughts really. The first was that something's going wrong with the way we govern our country. Our governing class has lost touch with the people in general. And I think it's very important that we begin to think hard about that and why it's happened, what we do about it. The first step must be that politicians must say what they mean and mean what they say. And I told the WASP women in my constituency and everywhere else where I met them that I would back them until they get justice, and I will continue to do so. But beyond politicians as individuals behaving in that way, the structures of our politics are no longer working properly. How can it be the case that the Ombudsman, who was set up particularly to allow citizens who feel an injustice, can go there separate to the state itself and pursue justice? How can it be the case that that organisation, which is there to give voice to people, can then be ignored by a government of whichever side? And while I don't think this debate should be about finger-pointing between the parties, but let's just be clear, the previous government introduced this and failed to implement the Ombudsman report itself, so it's a problem for the whole House, it seems to me, and we should just remind ourselves that that is the case. Now, I also had a second thought in mind, apart from changing our politics, which was social justice. It is simply not fair, it is not just that women should have been told at the last possible moment, and with the state itself sitting on report for 28 months, that their financial arrangements would change. Now, in Spain, I had a look at Spain. What did they do? They've increased the retirement age to 67, but they did it over 14 years. And that allowed people to make their own financial plans as to their own circumstances. Each person knew what was coming in due course. The British state, of course, because of the gap between the governed and the governing class, failed to do such a thing. Now, so let me just give one constituency case. A woman who came to see me, she was 58, she'd worked all her life, she'd saved a small amount of money, working hard, not earning very much, and her mum and dad were seriously ill. So she had enough money saved to get through to being 60, and so she then retired, went to look after her mum and dad, and then discovered, to her horror, that she would now have to wait for years for the pension to come in. The money she'd saved wasn't sufficient. The next thing that happened, her mum and dad sadly died, and she was left with no support or income of any kind. She had no carers allowance, nothing. She was left in total poverty as a result of the failure of the state to say what was going to happen to her in her life. The state cannot be allowed to make decisions of that kind, which transform the lives of people through no fault of their own, people who've worked and paid tax all their life in such a way. And there are millions of women who've suffered in their own individual way. All of us will have had lots and lots of stories. There are 6,170 WASPy women in my constituency alone. My majority is 6,600. You work it out for yourselves. Just work it out. Look at the numbers. And each one of those women will have members of the family who also feel a burning sense of injustice too. But it shouldn't be about us and saving our seats. It should be about what's right, about justice, about a different kind of politics entirely. And so it seems to me there were options available. The then government ignored them. They could have done a proper transition. And now we've got an ombudsman report which is clear, which is making a clear recommendation, and which imposes on us, every member in this House, to implement its recommendations. And we must do that. So let me just make one final point, because...
Order. 5-minute limit. I'm sorry, John. Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Sir. Our greatest Conservative Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, said that power has only one duty: to secure the social welfare of the people. Now, being held to account cements the legitimacy which governments derive from their democratic mandate. Beyond parliamentary accountability, over time, other checks and balances have emerged. With due respect to our excellent select committees and the ISC on which I serve, with its genesis in the late 1960s, the Ombudsman, perhaps in public terms, best represent that kind of independent and accountability, that sort of scrutiny. References to the Ombudsman for their considered deliberation are more an ornament to our policy. They have become an essential component of it. Members of Parliament from across the political spectrum represented in this debate today appreciate that just as things are not lightly sent to the Ombudsman, neither should their judgments be taken lightly. In particular, a government that attempts to brush under the carpet fallacies, faults and frailties identified by the Ombudsman is not just guilty of bad housekeeping, but concealing systemic failure. Yet that's exactly what has befallen the WASPy women. Those wives, mothers and grandmothers who toiled hard for Britain only to be told that their fair expectations of life after work were to be blighted by not just the consequence of government policy, the principles of which, by the way, they don't contest, but by the wholly inadequate implementation by a government department. In the words of the Ombudsman, maladministration in the DWP's communication about the 1995 Pensions Act resulted in complainants losing opportunities to make informed decisions about some things and to do some things differently, and diminished their sense of personal autonomy and financial control. The Ombudsman's remedy is to recompense on a scale, a series of levels from 1 to 6. The Ombudsman recommended level 4 in response. That means, quote, a significant and lasting injustice has to some extent affected someone's ability to live a relatively normal life. Few, if anyone, anticipated the current government's careless disregard of this just cause or the Ombudsman's recommendations. And unsurprising, because the Prime Minister himself made clear that he believed in fair and fast compensation. The Work and Pension Secretary said this injustice can't go on. I have been a long-standing supporter of the WASPy campaign. The Home Secretary said, I'm backing the WASPies. I'll keep on fighting for a better deal for WASPy women. Even the Deputy Prime Minister said categorically that Labour would compensate the WASPy women as it is their money. I will give way to my honourable friend.
Very quickly, I've had about 100 emails from WASPy women in my constituency. The Ombudsman found there was a case to answer. He recommended 5 options for compensation, leaning towards option 4. Even if the government wouldn't grant option 4, does my right honourable friend agree they should at least give the WASPy women something?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend's intervention. In working alongside the member for Salford and the mover of the motion today, I met many WASPy women and have since. They are not unreasonable. They don't actually expect every line of their most ambitious desire to be met, but they did expect the government to make some proper reference back to the Ombudsman report and consequently to approach them with a proposal to settle their demands. Yeah. And I find it extraordinary the government didn't do that. I am genuinely really surprised the government didn't do that. They're reasonable people. They understand the constraints that the government's working within. They expected greater respect, greater reference, as I said, to that independent scrutiny from our Ombudsman. You might have thought from all that I've read out about what government ministers said when they were shadow ministers that the government's position was clear, but it appears not. And I say once again, as I have before, to this new minister, change course. Few of those with power readily welcome criticism. Fewer still enjoy being chastised, but some, just some, and I hope that includes this minister, correct mistakes, right wrongs, and do what's just willingly. And in so doing, they grace the very concept of political privilege by nurturing popular faith in the rightful exercise of power. The challenges of meeting the reasonable demands of the WASPy women by simply implementing what the independent Ombudsman recommended is an opportunity for those in government with responsibility to step up and dignify their office by doing what is right. The way that the WASPy women have been treated, Sir Edward, is just not fair. And when public faith in fairness is lost, to draw on the words of the great poet W.B. Yeats, the ceremony of innocence is drowned as it becomes clear that the best lack all conviction.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Sir Edward. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. My mother is a WASPy woman, and indeed, as fortune would have it, today is her birthday. And I know that it would be wonderful if the Minister could give her that birthday present of changing the government's position on this issue. Because the arguments have been well rehearsed, and indeed the facts are clear thanks to the Ombudsman's report. Published in March 2024, it found that the DWP failed these women. The communication changes to the state pension age were not just inadequate, they were negligent. Women were left in the dark, unable to make informed decisions about their financial futures. The impact of this failure has been devastating. Lives upended, plans have been torn apart, women who worked hard, contributed to society and looked forward to a well-earned retirement were instead met with stress, anxiety, uncertainty and the harsh reality of financial insecurity. The government has rightly apologised. But I would gently say to the Minister, it is somewhat intellectually incoherent to apologise, but then also offer reasons, such as claiming that 90% of women knew, as to why compensation should not be paid. If you believe this, what are you apologising for? I'll happily give way.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way and wish his mother a very happy birthday. It is a great, great date of birth to share. He's obviously absolutely right that the Ombudsman's report concluded that there had been maladministration between 2005 and 2007, that some women had suffered a loss as a result of that maladministration. The government accepts there was that maladministration. The Ombudsman's then left it to Parliament to decide how to make sure that those who suffered loss get properly recompensed. What would it say about us as a Parliament if we decide that, yes, the maladministration is there, the loss is there, but frankly, we're not going to do anything about it.
Thank the honourable member for his intervention. And yes, I agree. And you make the point that it's down to Parliament. And I think that is an interesting point within this debate, that it's actually down to Parliament, because it is a parliamentary ombudsman rather than ministers. I have to point out, though, it would have been helpful if the Ombudsman's report had not been kicked into the long grass by the previous administration. I do continue to believe that other options were available to ministers, other than simply saying no. Looking at those most in need, we've already heard about those WASPy women who are beneath the poverty line, or looking at staged or interim payments based on age, or just engaging in dialogue at all about the Ombudsman findings, would all have been other options, and I would urge ministers to consider those. But rather to rehearse these arguments once again, as they have been many times, I want to talk more broadly about the impact this has on our politics. Indeed, my right honourable friend started with his remarks in this regard as well. You cannot leverage votes on an issue in opposition only to turn round in government and say no. Because this risks disenfranchisement of our voters. And history tells us, some very recent history tells us, that disenfranchisement does not lead to voters voting for no one. It leads them voting for anyone. And that is a danger that this country faces right now in terms of our politics and the trust in it. Voters' trust is rightly hard won, but it is very easily lost. During the general election campaign, on countless doorsteps, in numerous emails and conversations, I was challenged by Hartlepool voters on the WASPy issue. And to every single one of them, I pledged them my support. I stood by them as they campaigned, and I told them that if I became their Member of Parliament, I would always stand up for them, and I will not renege on that promise. I remember one such doorstep where I was joined by a senior member of the then shadow cabinet. The voter, fixing the shadow minister with a stare, gestured to me and said, "But how can we trust him?" And the reply came from the shadow minister, "Well, Jonathan, is Hartlepool first, country second, and party third." And I'm very happy to say that that remains the case. I'm not here to bash my party or my government. Politics isn't a binary thing. Although many will disagree, I believe that standing up and saying when you think something is wrong is a profound act of loyalty to my party. It is my duty to stand up for WASPy women. It's the promise I made to them. And no matter the consequence, that will never change. Thank you.
Graham Ledbetter.
Murray Western and Strathspey, latest figures for Murray and Highland regions suggest there are over 6,000 WASPy women, and they are an active and vociferous group. Out of 650 constituencies, they are in the top 25 for signatures on this petition. Women regularly travel the many hundreds of miles to London to demonstrate and demand fair recompense from this and previous governments. Sadly, they are being thwarted at every turn, and all the while, over 100 WASPy women die every single day, having seen no justice. They have proven that the communication with them was dire. The Ombudsman's report made that very clear after very thorough investigation. Yet not even a hint of recompense has been given. An utterly appalling situation. And let's be clear, the millions of women affected are of a generation of women that have been discriminated against throughout their working lives. They have been victims of lower pay than male counterparts doing the same job, something that has been well evidenced by equal pay settlements with numerous bodies. They've been victims of the glass ceiling, victims of both casual and overt sexism in the workplace, and victims of a patriarchal society that, whilst much diminished, still creates a major imbalance today. Women are far more likely to be worse off as pensioners than men, with on average much smaller pension pots when they come to retirement age. I will also make the point that ministers continually refer to the £22 billion black hole left them by the previous government. And while I accept that the legacy that would be left in financial terms is pretty grim, let's be very clear, that refers to recurring spend and absolutely not on a one-off compensatory spend. That financial experts and professionals and auditors take a very different view to one-off spend compared to recurring spend. And I think we need to keep that in context, and I hope the Minister will reflect on that when it comes to the summing up. Justice is justice and must not depend on budgets for it to be served. It is in that context that the vast majority of Labour MPs have refused to vote in the recent division forced on this issue by my own party. I do, however, commend the small number that stuck to their principles and voted with us, and I urge that larger majority who did not at the time to seriously consider their position in this matter and get back behind the campaigners that they were happy to pose for campaign photos with in the run-up to last year's election. As for those campaigners, I am humbled by the determination and drive they have shown and the dignified way in which they continue to make their point. They are once again here in numbers from throughout the UK, and I commend and fully support their efforts to get the fair and just compensation that they deserve. Thank you.
Brian Leishman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Edward. It is an honour to serve under your chairship today, and also my thanks go to the Honourable Member for South Cotswolds for an excellent opening speech. Since my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Working Pensions announcement in December, members of the House are familiar with the Parliamentary Health and Service Ombudsman's findings. I was appalled at the announcement when it was made, and I am no less so now. I, like many other Labour parliamentary colleagues, have attended rallies and met with many WASPI women. In opposition, these victims of injustice had our unwavering support. Now we are in power, and they are still no closer to getting what they truly deserve. I will do.
The honourable member for giving way. I do absolutely agree with him, and I think it's a very dangerous precedent to go against an independent ombudsman that has been commissioned. What I would say, however, is that I think all sides of Parliament are equally to blame here, and I think it's slightly unfair to blame it all on the one minister sitting on his own there. So thank you.
Thank you to my honourable friend. I wasn't singling out any, for the record, I certainly wasn't singling out any particular minister. And yes, it is an issue, and to be honest, an injustice that consecutive governments have stained on. And as I said, now that we are in power, it is on our desk, though. We could actually make it right. So the responsibility is with us in government. In January, I signed the 10-minute rule bill. I voted for WASPI women to receive the justice that they deserve, and my commitment to them is ongoing. And today I urge the government to recognise that the people that voted for us don't want the language of tough choices, because it always seems to be the way that what tough choices really mean is working-class people becoming poorer. It's clear that status quo politics is not the answer. There are millions of people who are disenfranchised, demoralised and desperate. And it's no wonder people are sick of hearing about fiscal constraints. After 14 years of austerity, a pandemic and then a cost of living crisis that has increased inequality all over the UK. Last July, the electorate voted for change from all of that. And there is no change in carrying on with failed Tory policies that serve to impoverish people. Because on this side of the chamber, we all believe that the election of a Labour government is to relieve the suffering of injustices, to deliver social justice and fairness, to make things better and build an alternative economy and society that works for the benefit of the many. The WASPI women are not asking for what they aren't due. All they are asking for is fairness and justice. And now that we are in government, we would do well to live and deliver on our party's true values.
Under your chairmanship. I am grateful for the opportunity to speak in this debate on an issue that is incredibly important to thousands of women in my constituency of Eastleigh and their families. I would also like to pay tribute to the WASPI campaigners who are here today and all my constituents who've campaigned tirelessly on this issue. This debate is about justice, it's about fairness, and it's about doing what is right. Liberal Democrats have said all along that we support fair and fast compensation for all the women who were unfairly impacted by the changes to the state pension age. They include my constituent Mary. Instead of retiring and receiving a pension in 2016 when she reached 60, as she had been expecting all her working life, she then found herself, in her words, having to live on virtually nothing for 6 years. Ill health following breast cancer combined with the side effects of chemotherapy left her too tired to do very much at all. Then there is Karen. Karen's life was upended when she took voluntary redundancy in 2016, believing she only had 3 years until her state pension, only to discover that she had 6 years to wait. The unexpected delay left her struggling financially while caring for an elderly mother, a severely disabled sister, and young grandchildren. Karen is deeply disillusioned with the government's decision to ignore the Ombudsman's finding, and frankly, who can blame her? She feels lifelong injustices faced by women of her generation, from being denied equal workplace rights after having children to the state pension age changes, have been systematically ignored. Can the Minister... I will give way.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask if you would agree with me that the WASPI women are rightly using the word gaslighting to describe the fact that the government is suggesting there's no problem here, that everybody knew, by not standing by its pledge in opposition as if it was never made, and that this really does strike a bit harshly at people who are women who've spent their whole lives facing other aspects of sexism in the way that you've described.
Well, my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and I will come on to that a little bit later. Mary and Karen, like so many of my constituents who were impacted by the changes to the state pension age, feel incredibly let down by the government. After so long of being ignored by the previous Conservative government, they really believe the MPs who told them they supported their claim for fair and fast compensation. The government should be compensating these women because it is the right thing to do. Many of the women in my constituency who were impacted found themselves in dire circumstances with little to live on, forced to take low-paid jobs to make ends meet, in some cases turning to food banks. These are not wealthy women, and the unexpected loss of income, the fact that they had to work much longer than they were expecting, has had a huge impact on their lives and the lives of their families. That's in addition to having to cope with the loss of their winter fuel allowance, particularly challenging when it has been so bitterly cold. Many of them are also unpaid carers. There is also the wider issue of feeling as though they don't matter to this government, that because they are women of a certain age, they are somehow invisible. These women were born in the 1950s. They spent years working and raising families. Many of them will now have caring responsibilities, and frankly, the way they have been treated by successive governments is appalling. They deserve respect, and they deserve to be treated with dignity. So I'm afraid that this has been incredibly badly handled by the government. We all recognise that the previous Conservative government left the country in an absolute mess, and there are so many issues that need fixing, including most urgently NHS and social care, but that doesn't make this head-in-the-sand approach right. The Parliamentary Ombudsman said very clearly that there had been maladministration, and the Secretary of State and the government accepted that there had been maladministration. To turn around and say, we're sorry about what happened, but we just don't have the money to compensate you, simply isn't good enough. These women feel betrayed. Telling them that 90% of them knew about the changes when the Ombudsman found that that wasn't the case is gaslighting. Indeed, the Ombudsman stated that 43% of the women knew. That's quite a difference. And if the government continues to ignore the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman's recommendation for compensation, it raises the question, what is the point of the Ombudsman? I would ask the Minister, where else can people turn if they are victims of maladministration or wrongdoing and feel that no one is listening to them? Many women maintain they didn't receive letters at all, and the DWP does not have a record of who it wrote to. I can well believe this. If you've had any dealings with the DWP, either as a private citizen or on behalf of constituents, you'll know what a nightmare it can be. And I suspect if you ask many people, even now, do you know the exact date you can retire and receive the state pension, they probably wouldn't know. So I urge the government to reconsider its response and look at providing a scheme of compensation, starting with those on pension credit. We know that the government is facing incredibly difficult challenges, but ignoring the voices of thousands and thousands of women is a huge mistake. This issue is not going to go away.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Sir Edward. It is right that this House should consider compensation for women affected by changes to the state pension age. Before, during and after the general election, I pledged my support to the women of Western Bartonshire affected by this injustice, close to 6,000 of them. It was right and fair to do so then, and I cannot and will not turn my back on them now. I continue to support Western Bartonshire WASPI women, led by their inspirational coordinator, Elizabeth Daly. In March 2024, the PHSO's Stage 2 and 3 report found clear maladministration in the way the DWP communicated state pension age changes. I am clear, based on the communication I've received from my constituents, that they did not know that their state pension age was changing, or if they did, they received this information far too late to make the necessary adjustments to their retirement plans. Also, the PHSO instructed Parliament, instructed all of us to consider the findings, the rare but necessary step of laying before Parliament the report. Not just the Department or the Government. It was for us to consider the findings, apologise and issue compensation. For that very welcome apology for maladministration to be in any way meaningful, there must be redress for the injustice. There must be compensation. Not a handout for hardship, not means-tested, but on the same basis as all our other recently announced government compensation schemes. I urge my government colleagues to look again at the Ombudsman's report and its recommendations. Current national financial challenges should never be a barrier to awarding compensation. To ignore the Ombudsman's report not only undermines their important role and function, it is, in this context, unprecedented and sets us on a very dangerous path. There is nothing right and fair about the current statement to the House of the 17th of December 2024. Please review and instead explore what scheme this government can consider to offer financial redress to the 1950s women. 6,000 in Western Bartonshire, over 300,000 in Scotland, like my constituent Elizabeth, and I have permission to make reference to Elizabeth's story. Elizabeth said, "I left school and started working in the summer of 1971, aged 15. I was expected to retire on my 60th birthday, which was December 2015. In the summer of 2014, my husband took gravely ill and was in ICU for several weeks and hospitalised for 3 months in total. He was discharged with a walking frame and tube feeding, which I had to be trained to administer. I was given compassionate leave when required and allowed to temporarily reduce my working hours for 6 months. After that period, I had maximising attendance review and had to decide to return to full-time or permanently reduce my hours to 17.5. I had to choose the latter, as he was still very weak and dependent. After he had a relapse, I was absent again. I had another maximising attendance review. It was during this meeting that I discovered I would not be able to retire at 60 after all. I was distraught. I had reduced my hours and the other half of my post had been filled. When my husband died in 2018, I was earning half pay. I continued to work and, in fact, finding myself on the front line at the age of 65, my mental health deteriorated again and I was absent from work during the winter of 2020. Then I made the decision to give notice of my retirement, but I wouldn't receive my state pension until mid-December 2021. Choices were removed from women. If we had known about this change in age, we could have made different decisions. Every decision I made up to 2014 was made in the assumption that I would retire at 60. I feel I've been a victim of injustice, with the PHSO confirming that women born in the 1950s suffered maladministration from the DWP. We have waited long enough. Mr Chair, they have waited long enough and it's time to act. Thank you, Sir Edward.
Manuela Pettigella.
the honourable member for South Cotswolds for opening this debate, and thanks to the hundreds of thousands of residents who have signed this important petition and to the formidable campaigners. My constituency of Stratford-on-Avon has an estimated 6,500 women who have been impacted by this pension injustice. Many have contacted me to let me know of their feeling of betrayal by those who should put wrongs right. For years, millions of WASPI women have fought for justice after being failed by successive governments. These women work hard, contributed to our society and played by the rules, only to have their state pension age changed without proper notice, leaving many financially stranded. The Ombudsman ruling was clear. The government's failure to communicate these changes caused real financial hardship, and those affected deserve compensation. Thousands have died without justice or redress. And yet, what did we hear in December? That the DWP was rejecting the Ombudsman recommended compensation. Instead of standing up for these women, they turned their backs on them. Let's be clear, this is not just about payouts. This is about acknowledging the harm done, about recognizing the stress, the anxiety, the broken plans, the financial insecurity, and the poverty these women now face. Yes, I will.
For giving way. WASPI women clearly should be fairly compensated. I've got a woman that I spoke to just this week who lives in Street. She worked hard for 40 years, but has recently been made homeless. She's been evicted as a result of not receiving fair compensation. So does my honourable friend agree with me that the government should reverse their decision and give WASPI women the compensation that they deserve?
Thank you, my honourable friend, and I fully agree. I've heard as well of women who had to keep working despite ill health, who have had to use up all their life savings, who have faced poverty and they're facing poverty now. The Liberal Democrats have long stood with WASPI women. We made a manifesto commitment to fight for fair compensation, and we will not let this issue drop. The previous Conservative government failed to implement the recommendations. This Labour government had a chance to do the right thing. It still does, so please do. We will not stop fighting until these women get the compensation they deserve. It is time for this government to listen, to act, and to deliver justice for WASPI women. Thank you.
Ian Byrne.
It's always a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I'd just like to add an apology from John MacDonald, who would normally be able, unfortunately, he's chairing a disability cut meeting as we speak. There are more than 5,000 women in my Liverpool West Derby constituency affected by these pension changes. I've sat down with many of them. Now their lives are being changed forever by a political decision. Plans scrapped, and many of these proud women are being forced into poverty. The Minister cannot brush aside the fact that the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman report published in March 2024 vindicated the WASPI's campaign's assertion that women involved are being unjustly treated and denied money to them. The report made it clear that the DWP should acknowledge its failings and apologise for the impact it had on complaints and others affected. And the Ombudsman also ruled that compensation is owed, but that as it cannot order compensation, it is for the government to determine the terms of this redress. And at last, we had a ruling which reflected the injustice, and Parliament was given a clear instruction by the Ombudsman to fix this mess. It had been the expectation of many, including myself, that the new government would right this historic wrong and deliver compensation as a matter of urgency at an amount that was fair and just. When the Secretary of State stood up and announced that no compensation at all would be paid to our 50s-born women, the shock and despair was felt across the UK. It was palpable. And the shock and anger felt by my constituents at this decision has been made absolutely crystal clear to me on a number of occasions. On Friday, Minister, I'm opening the Centre for Social Justice in West Derby, and I am absolutely sure that many over 50s women will be coming through the doors asking for help after so many blows from political choices made in this place, from the pension changes, from austerity to the winter fuel payment cut. It's endless, and it feels endless for them women. It's simply an injustice that must be put right. I told the previous governments in a similar debate in this place last year, this is an injustice that needs to be addressed urgently. It's completely unacceptable that the government has so far refused to take action to right this wrong. There is nothing to stop the government taking immediate action to provide compensation. I, like many others in this place speaking in this debate, I've pledged my support to the WASPI women on a number of occasions, and over 50s women, and I continue to do that, and I stand steadfast by that pledge of support. I've been to Downing Street twice recently, last month, to call for full restitution, but also, Minister, mediation with the groups. They've made an offer to work with the government to look at how we can get out of this logjam. And at Prime Minister's questions in December, I asked the Prime Minister to let Parliament decide if compensation should be paid. A call I make again today to the Minister, what I believe should be a free vote in Parliament on the issue, so we get a true reflection of the will of this place. The current position is the wrong position, and I genuinely urge the government to rethink it. It has undermined the Ombudsman's position, it has undermined the office of the Ombudsman, and indeed faith in this place, which has already been mentioned. It's been shook to the core for so many of these women, and I know from speaking to the women affected in my constituency just how much hurt it has caused and continues to cause. The sense of betrayal of politics, of this place and of our governments is absolutely palpable, and I urge the Minister, on behalf of the many Liverpool West Derby constituents affected by this injustice, to rethink, change course and sit down, mediation, and eventually we can award compensation to all those infected by this absolutely grievous injustice.
Rinde. Thank you, Sir Edward. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the 160,000 individuals who signed the e-petition to secure this debate, and to my honourable friend, the member for South Cotswolds, for opening it with power and with passion. All with a view to helping to address a grave injustice, one that has affected millions of women across our country, including in Eastbourne, known for being home to many a great pensioner. And we all know that the WASPI women were let down by successive governments when an increase to the state pension age was implemented without proper communication and without proper notice. And as a result, these women, many of whom had worked for decades, paid into the system in good faith, only to find their retirement plans shattered with little time to adjust. This scandal has left many women in financial hardship, forced to continue working or unable to retire with dignity. And one of them is Yvonne, one of my constituents in Eastbourne. And she said in a letter to me, I was offered early retirement. I did my sums as carefully as I could, as I still had a mortgage to pay, and I accepted the early retirement offer. It was only after everything was signed and settled did I discover that the months was now changed into years. This meant having to find work for longer than I expected, and giving up the plans my husband and I have. And there will be so many more women represented by members across political divides in this room who are in very similar scenarios. Of course I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and his story of Yvonne from his constituency reminds me of my constituent Christina, who had a long career in the NHS and took a lower paid job in 2012 on the assumption that she would be able to claim her state pension in 2016. It wasn't until she contacted the DWP after she'd left the NHS that she found out that she wasn't entitled to that state pension for double the amount of time that she thought she'd have to survive on a smaller income. So this has been the experience of countless women in my constituency and across the country who've planned their retirements and futures based on information that they were never given. So does the honourable friend agree with me that the continued betrayal of these women by successive governments is disgraceful, and it's ignoring the Ombudsman recommendation sets a dangerous precedent?
I could not agree more with my honourable friend. And nor could, it seems, the Ombudsman, because they have been very clear that these women suffered maladministration and that they should be compensated. No ifs and no buts. It's therefore grossly unjust that the government has ruled out such compensation, despite apologising for the injustice that's been recognised. And compensation is not just a political issue. In my view, it is a moral obligation. And I would therefore urge the government to act on the Ombudsman's findings and U-turn on its refusal to provide fair compensation to the WASPI women. Liberal Democrats stand with the WASPI women's continued fight for compensation, and I'm proud to stand alongside WASPI women like Angela Boas in Eastbourne to continue fighting for the justice that they need and they deserve.
It's a pleasure to work under your chairmanship, as always. And I'm very pleased that the Petitions Committee has brought forward this debate, especially given that as many as 160,000 signatories have been recorded to this petition, some 266 of them from my own constituency. And I'd like to begin by thanking all of those who've written to me and all of those who have campaigned and fought so hard over the years to try to take forward the issue of WASPI women to a successful conclusion. And I should probably begin by making a declaration, not one that's required by procedure, but one that is relevant to this debate. And that is that I am a WASPI woman, one of over 4,000 in my constituency. Now, clearly, I'm still working and in a fairly privileged position as a member of this House. But I have watched the various increases in the state pension qualifying age with great interest over the years. I understand why it's necessary to equalise the pension age for men and women, but it's important to see that in context. In 1995, Parliament legislated to increase the pension age for women from 60 to 65, bringing it in line with the retirement age for men. This was meant to happen in stages between April 2010 and 2020. But in 2011, new legislation accelerated the timetable, meaning that women's state pension age reached 65 by November 2018. However, that same Act brought forward the increase in the overall state pension age to 66, which happened between December 2018 and October 2020 for both men and women. I have to say, for many women of my age, I think it's often felt as though the qualifying age was becoming more and more distant the closer you got to your 60s. And as we know, many women did not receive notification of the changes in the qualifying age, and many others did not receive it timorously enough to allow them to make adjustments and changes. As we know, the Ombudsman considered the case of the WASPI women and concluded that there had been maladministration in the period 2005 to 2006, with a 28-month delay in beginning a direct mail exercise to notify affected women. Now, I have to say, I don't know whether I ever got a letter about the raising of the state pension age personally. I'm someone who tends to keep that kind of thing, but I don't have such a letter. I do remember a friend telling me about it, and I then went onto the website and looked at the online calculator and found out that I would be 66 before I would get my pension. But not everyone has the opportunity to do that. Not everyone has access to the internet, and not everyone is literate enough on IT to be able to make those calculations. So as the Ombudsman said, such women lost opportunities to make informed decisions about their finances, which diminished their sense of personal autonomy and financial control. But it seems to me that when an Ombudsman records findings such as this and suggests a course of action, then we should follow it. But the Ombudsman clearly had an idea about thinking within government, and I mean government in the generic sense, as his report predates this government. And I say that because he concluded that he should lay his report before Parliament and hoped that parliamentarians would implement his findings. Sir Edward, that is what I hoped would happen. That is what I expected would happen. And I cannot say how disappointed I am that it did not happen. But I would say gently to the Minister, it's not too late to put that right. Now, I mentioned earlier that I'm in a privileged position, and I am. I'm privileged in having been sent here to represent my constituents, and I will continue to use that privilege to support WASPI women and to fight for them until such times as the Ombudsman's recommendations are implemented.
Ben Legg.
Thank you very much, Senator. It's a pleasure to serve on your chairmanship. I should also like to join others in congratulating the member for South Cotswolds for opening this debate in such a powerful way. I had to do some sums earlier on, Sir Edward, because I seem to recall that the very first time I spoke as a Member of Parliament was in a debate in this very chamber on the matter of this injustice to 1950s-born women. And I was able to find out that it was actually the 5th of July 2017 that I made that contribution. And if I recall, during that day there was, as there seems to be this afternoon, a great consensus amongst members that 1950s-born women have indeed suffered a great injustice. What has changed since then, however, is that we have had years of debates, of petitions, of demonstrations, and an investigation by the Ombudsman, who's also found in their favour. Little could I have imagined back then, some 8 years ago now, that we would be standing here in this very chamber debating and agreeing yet again that a great injustice had befallen 1950s-born women, and yet we'd be arguing about a government refusing to implement and to honour the recommendations of the Ombudsman. It would be easy to despair if it wasn't for the absolute inspiration that is the 1950s-born women of my constituency. The thousands of women who have spent the past eight or so years diligently attending meetings, organising petitions, offering support to each other, because the impact of this maladministration is severe, as other members have mentioned. People have fallen to great financial hardship and distress, and far too often that has also led to strain on family relationships as well as an impact on people's health. But these women have stuck together, they've organised, they've ensured that they give each other support in the darkest of days, and more importantly, they set about the task of diligently collecting the information and the evidence required of them to prove their case as part of the Ombudsman's process. And so I would agree with all those who have spoken before me that having done that, having jumped through the many hoops of the various stages of the Ombudsman process and some compiling cases to the independent case examiner, of having done all that, proven their case, having the Ombudsman rule in their favour, for us to then fail to offer them that justice is a real travesty. And I would agree with others who claim that it does call into question not only the integrity of the Ombudsman process itself, but perhaps more fundamentally the whole democratic process as embodied by this Parliament.
I'm extremely grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for making a powerful and eloquent case. And he's absolutely right that this goes beyond even the just case of the WASPI women to something more fundamental about how governments are held to account and how they willingly deal with that. You know, this is not something that should be extracted with pain and anguish from a government. It's something the government should step forward, change heart, change tune and deliver.
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for that intervention, and I very much agree. We have an opportunity to right this wrong now. And not only would it be delivering justice to the 1950s-born women who suffered as a consequence of these changes, or the failure in communicating these changes to the state pension age, but it will also do a very important contribution to restoring faith in MPs, in Parliament, and the whole democratic process. And so I very much hope that the government can reconsider on this matter. However, I have to say, and perhaps this is the cynic in me, or the pessimist rather in me, when we consider that everything we've asked of 1950s women to do in recent years, of jumping through all the various hoops of the processes, of coming up to London, and if you're coming up from West Wales, I can assure you that is quite the journey to make, of petitioning, of demonstrating, of organising, to have had the case proven and exceeded and accepted by the Ombudsman, but then to ignore it, is quite outrageous. But on top of that, then, there is this case of the government is refusing, as I understand it, to even engage now with representatives of 1950s women in alternative forms of mediation. And perhaps worse of all, and this would be my one call and request of the Minister, give Parliament the opportunity and government time to vote on this matter. We've already heard this afternoon's debate of 4 options that the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman offered. Give us that chance to express and voice the will of Parliament, because I am confident that there is that consensus in Parliament that we do want to see justice done to a generation of quite inspiring women that I feel incredibly honoured to represent.
Hussain.
Thank you, Sir Edward. Of course, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I also say this is a very important debate that matters very greatly to all of my constituents, but in particular impacts 4,900 women in my constituency, as has been said by my honourable friend who very eloquently opened this debate. Over 3.7 million women born in the 1950s have suffered grave injustices because of the change to state pension age brought about in 95, 2007 and 2011. Changes that were introduced without proper notice, leaving many in financial and emotional distress. 1950s women worked hard all their lives, they paid their dues and contributed to the country and the economy, only for many of them to find that their retirement they had planned for was stolen from them without support and without the basic courtesy of being informed in time. The Women Against State Pension Inequality WASPI campaign have fought tirelessly for over a decade to shine a light on this injustice, and I pay tribute, along with other members in this House, to their determination, and I want to assure those in my constituency in particular they continue to have my support and solidarity. Sir Edward, the previous government kicked the can down the road and delayed committing to anything that could repair the damage done to WASPI women. Their delay has meant that at least 300,000 WASPI women have died waiting for the justice they deserved. And I will say the current government must not and cannot go down the same path. Now, whilst I note this government's acknowledgement of the Ombudsman report, that failings happened, communication was inadequate and women suffered, I also note the commitment to ensure this maladministration and delay in sending out notifications never happens, again, both of which are welcome. But frankly, an apology alone is not enough. Apologies don't pay the rent, they don't put food on the table, and they don't undo years of financial struggle. So let me be clear, this is about the principle of government decision-making and the responsibility to communicate properly so that people can plan their futures with confidence. Crucially, it's about, as has been said by many honourable members, recompense and redress. In this case, a 28-month delay in notifying affected women meant they lost precious time to adjust their plans. Some lost tens of thousands of pounds, others lost their homes. That's time and money that they will never get back. So I say to the Minister, we must look again at the Ombudsman recommendations for fair remedy, because words are not enough. We do need action. And I know that a High Court challenge could be on the way. However, this should not be necessary. Correct. The WASPI women should not have to take their own government to court to be heard. And the point has been made, and I want to echo it. There is a reason we have parliamentary ombudsmen, there is a reason we have inquiries, and there is a reason we should follow well-made recommendations. And I believe that this is a case where
the government does seriously need to look at this. And we must now ask, what more can be done to ensure that 1950s women receive fair treatment? So I urge the Minister to address this and set out the next steps the government is taking to work constructively with campaigners, MPs and affected women to find a fair resolution, because whether it's through targeted support, a compensation framework or other measures, we must ensure that WASPI women are not abandoned once again.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Sir Edward, and it is always a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I also thank the Honourable Member for Cotswold South for introducing this debate and pay tribute to the many women who've come along. I'd love to say it's a pleasure to take part in this debate, but it's not. After 8 years of taking part in debates and protests and meetings and APPG meetings and private members' bills about this issue and waiting on the Ombudsman's report, it is above all frustrating that we're having to do it yet again because the government has failed, in my eyes, in its responsibility to uphold the Ombudsman's recommendations. And there's a particular irony for me in that last week I was in New York at the Commission on the Status of Women in the World, and I come back here and I wonder exactly what this debate and the situation that the WASPI women find themselves in says about the status of women in this country, when a generation, as has been said, who worked hard, paid their taxes and their national insurance, are now finding that there's no compensation, even though the government admits that it let them down. One other thing which strikes me, though, looking at the Labour benches across from me, is hope that if so many Labour MPs recognise the flaw, the failing in this government's stance on WASPI women, perhaps the government will listen. It's not listening to the opposition, it's not listening to the WASPI women. Perhaps it will listen to its own MPs when they say, you've got this wrong, you're letting these women down. And we will have an end to this. Because when I was elected almost 8 years ago now, I admit I didn't know much about the WASPI women and their case. But one of the first women who came to me when I was elected had been affected. Her letter from the DWP was late. And by the time she had made her decisions about her financial future decisions before it reached her. She was less than 2 years away from retirement when she was told she would have to wait an additional 5 years. And like many women, she lost out financially. Many women will also have been let down by this government's decision to not award compensation. And one point I would make is that the previous government was criticised for kicking it into the long grass. They did. But this government had an opportunity to overturn that. And they haven't taken it, despite the promises which many of them made, many cabinet ministers made before the general election. Instead, it's turned its back on millions of pension-age women who were wronged through no fault of their own. For years, we have pushed the government to do something. And I suspect that the WASPI women, not just here but up and down the country, felt in July of last year that a corner had been turned and that the Ombudsman's report would be upheld, that a Labour government would stand by them. I think the time has come when the Labour government has to be as good as its word to the WASPI women and take action. Thank you.
Elaine Stewart.
Thank you, Sir Edward. It's an honour to serve under your chairship. Petitions are powerful tools for democracy and amplifies people's fighting for a cause. Listening to these voices is just as important. My sister is a WASPI woman, and I stand here to voice my support for all WASPI women. These courageous and resilient women have faced an injustice. They have toiled throughout their lives, often battling against societal disadvantages. They are not just campaigners, they are our mothers, our grandmothers, and they are the pillars of our families and communities. The sudden and unexpected change to the state pension age has plunged some women into financial disrepair, forcing them to struggle during their time during a time which should be their golden years. I am immensely proud to support a Labour government that has tirelessly worked to rectify historic wrongs, from addressing mine workers' pension to supporting LGBT veterans and compensating victims of infected blood scandal. This government has consistently stood against injustice, but failed to recognise this one. The WASPI women were not given adequate notice nor time to prepare for these changes. Many had planned their futures based on the original pension age, only to have their lives disrupted without proper consultation or consideration. The government must confront this injustice and provide fair compensation to those affected. It is time to right this wrong. We must learn from the past to ensure that no other generation endures this unfair treatment. The DW claims 90% of women were aware of the changes to the state pension, which means that 10% were left in the dark due to the DWP's failure to provide timely information. The DWP's communication failures affects the lives of WASPI women, particularly the most vulnerable. The Parliamentary Ombudsman found that the Department of Work and Pensions committed maladministration by failing to effectively communicate the changes to the state pension age and recommendations that the government provided compensation to the affected women. It is impossible to quantify the financial hardship and emotional distress these women have endured. But we also must recognise that this government inherited a £22 billion financial deficit from the Conservatives. But we must also consider that the most judicial use of taxpayers' money. Having said that, I implore the DWP and the Minister to revisit this issue with urgency and compassion it deserves. I am standing here and I am reminded of Margaret, a constituent from Cumnock. She was a devoted single mother who worked tirelessly to provide for her children and uphold her responsibilities to society. In her words, I paid my way. I promised Margaret that I would fight for justice on her behalf. When the decision was made not to compensate, I returned to visit Margaret and reaffirmed my commitment to her. Now, by standing here, I want to amplify the voices of Margaret, Lynn and Francis and countless others like them. We need to share the story of the WASPI women, and in doing that, we need to push for justice. Thank you.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Sir Edward. It's a pleasure to serve under you. And I thank the petitioners and the member for South Cotswolds in bringing this debate today and leading the debate. The claim that the government has made is that 90% of affected women knew of the changes to their state pension age. This survey was not representative of the affected cohort. Around 200 women born in the 1950s were asked out of a total sample size of 1,950 people. And so I asked the Minister, as the WASPI campaigners asked, is it fair to let the DWP mark their own homework? And I also asked the Minister to explain why they have taken the almost unprecedented step of ignoring the independent findings of the Parliamentary and Health Services Ombudsman. Several hundred women in my constituency, along with thousands of other women in Scotland, signed the petition to introduce a compensation scheme. Almost 160,000 across these islands. And I'm sorry, Sir Edward, if I sound angry on this very auspicious day, and I must say I wish everyone here, and you, Sir Edward, and people watching at home, a very happy St Patrick's Day. But I am angry, and I reflect the anger of the WASPI woman. It's the human aspect of this decision that so sticks in the craw. Pensioners seem to be singled out as the ones to take the hardest cuts of all. Many WASPI women have written to me talking of losing family and friends who never lived to see the justice for their loss. This was a government elected on promises, many of them in Scottish constituencies, a promise of change. Yet all we see are a series of broken promises. National insurance rises, the family farm tax, pensioners and fuel poverty, the Scotch whisky industry, lower energy prices, the two-child cap. SNP supporters last July lent Labour candidates their vote. They believed the promises that were made. Read my lips, said Anna Sarwar. No more austerity under Labour. Yet what we see is attack after attack on the most vulnerable people. And here we have the WASPI women, people that many Labour candidates stood with, had their photographs taken with, holding placards promising their support, and this government has spurned them. Well, hell hath no fury. The WASPI women won't forget, along with all the other broken promises. When Labour MPs, and I've heard many Scottish Labour MPs speaking here today, when Labour MPs had a chance to support our motion, only one Scottish Labour MP voted with us. One. 2026 and the Scottish Holyrood elections are just around the corner, and 2029 may seem like a long way off. But like the WASPI women, voters will not forget their broken promises. And so I say, Sir Edward, and to this government, give WASPI women the justice that they deserve. Thank you.
Michelle Scroggum.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank the honourable member for securing this important debate. I first want to acknowledge the tireless campaigning of the Barrow and Furness WASPI women. They've worked tenaciously to advocate for fairness and justice for all of those affected. WASPI women didn't ask for this change. They had no say in how it was implemented, but they are the ones left to cope with the consequences, the financial strain, the anxiety and the uncertainty. The issue is not about opposing pension reform. No one denies that we need a sustainable and fair pension system, but we must recognise that the way these changes were carried out was deeply unfair to those who had no ability to prepare. It's also important to recognise the context in which the government finds itself. This is not a mess created by this government, but, as in all too many cases right now, it is this government that has been left with the difficult task of clearing it up. We must acknowledge that there is no easy solution here, but the findings of the Ombudsman's report provided a critical assessment of the way that the previous government handled the pension age changes. The report confirms what many of us had long suspected, that the communication of these changes was inadequate and misleading. These findings underline the need for a fair and swift resolution to ensure that the WASPI women are not left to bear the consequences of these failures alone. I would like to commend the excellent work of the State Pension and Equality for Women APPG and encourage members across all parties to continue to work with them. It remains a vital forum for dialogue and understanding. There is still time to deliver a fair and equitable compensation package for these women. This is the time to right this wrong. The way forward is continued collaboration, where ministers keep the door open to those who have legitimate concerns and wishes to find a fair resolution. This ongoing dialogue is essential to ensure that the affected women are heard and that a fair and just solution is found. There are many WASPI women in my constituency. I pledged to back these women, and I stand by that pledge until justice is served. Thank you.
Yeah. Alex Burrow.
Serve with you in the chair, and I would like to thank the Petitions Committee for bringing this important debate today and to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for South Cotswolds, for her excellent opening remarks. In my constituency of North East Hampshire, there are almost 6,000 women within the age group affected by these pension changes. And we've heard that only 43% of them knew that their pension age was changing. That translates to 3,416 women in North East Hampshire who were unaware of these pension changes, which ultimately impacted them significantly in the following years. The government at the time failed to inform women affected by changes to their pension age. And as we've heard, many people have had harrowing stories. One of my constituents, now in her 70s, was a victim of this maladministration and is forced to continue working now to supplement her income due to the lack of notice regarding her retirement age. As with many others, had she received clear, timely communication from the Department for Work and Pensions, she would have been able to make informed life choices and plan accordingly. Now, if a private pension provider failed to inform you about when you could start to receive your pension, you would rightly expect compensation for the decisions made based on incomplete information. In this case, you would be budgeting with the wrong number. And this situation should be no different for those affected by government errors. The government should be ashamed it has rejected the financial payouts recommended by the Ombudsman. North East Hampshire has one of the most significant gender pay gaps, heightened by the fact that men work disproportionately more in full-time jobs than women. It is inequality in salary and employment opportunities that then worsens the disparity at the point of state pension. This has led to women being less financially independent and increasingly vulnerable in their later years. Let's be clear. I will.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. My constituent Carol worked as a learning assistant throughout her entire adult life, and she'd planned for a very happy retirement until she found out, with just a few months to spare, that she had another 5 years to work. And that caused significant mental health challenges for her, and ultimately a stroke that she attributes to the stress that she endured during that very difficult time. Does the honourable member agree with me that 1950s-born women experienced dreadful workplace injustices throughout their career related to, for example, lower pay that she was just referring to, but that this government has a unique opportunity to undo one of the injustices that they face in the retirement? Thank you.
Thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I absolutely agree. Let's be very clear, this is a generation of women who faced discrimination at work. More discrimination than women today, a larger gender pay gap than women today, more glass ceilings, fewer promotion opportunities, lower pensions, lower savings. These are the women who did the vast majority of unpaid housework and caring responsibility. This is a generation of women who worked more hours for less pay for their whole lives, only to find that the goalposts were moved at the worst possible moment. The Ombudsman's reports have rightly said that WASPI women should be compensated fairly. As a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for State Pension Inequality for Women, I have been part of the calls on the government to address this injustice. We should not be living in a society where promises are a campaign tactic abandoned at the first instance of power. We saw Labour MPs meeting many WASPI campaigners and expressing their heartfelt support before July last year. We know that maladministration occurred. We know that WASPI women have been harmed by this injustice. It is now time for the government to act.
Long Bailey.
Thank you, sir. You're very kind. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I want to thank the Honourable Member for the South Cotswolds for her passionate speech. Now, my friend, the Right Honourable Member for South Holland and the Deepings, made a very pertinent point earlier, and he said that the fundamental issue here is the accountability of government, the ability of this place and citizens to hold the government to account when they get something wrong. And what we're seeing happening today is that accountability mechanism, that framework, being demolished before our very eyes. Because if you render impotent the mechanisms that have been developed to hold government to account, which is what's happened to the Ombudsman, then you damage the very heart of democracy itself. That's how important this issue is. Now, the Ombudsman was clear. These women suffered injustice and that compensation was owed to them. The Ombudsman was clear that the government should act on that, and they made the very rare decision to place their report not before the Department for Work and Pensions, but before this place. And the reason they did that is because they felt that the department, under all governments, not just this government, was not capable of delivering justice for the women affected. And they were right, because what we've seen now is a complete dismissal of the injustice these women have suffered. Now, I don't believe that this is the intention of the Minister. I don't believe it's the intention of the government. And they have the opportunity now to change course. There is a very real prospect of a High Court judicial review. This will incur significant legal costs on the part of the government, legal costs that the government will have to justify to the taxpayer, given that the Ombudsman's report has already been very, very clear that compensation was owed. So will the Minister now look again at the case for compensation? Yes, I will give way.
I'm extremely grateful to the Honourable Lady, and I rise for simply two purposes. The first is to put onto record her contribution to this campaign, which has been outstanding, alongside others, but she's been a notable figure in this process. And the second is to make a suggestion which she might make to the government, and that is, why don't the government meet a small delegation of MPs of all parties with a group of WASPI women? Let's see if we can thrash this out in a way which allows the government to go off the hook and allows the WASPI women to receive the satisfaction they so richly deserve.
My honourable member for his intervention, and completely agree. And the all-party parliamentary group on this issue has extended an invitation to meet the Minister. We will, of course, extend this invitation to include women's groups in accordance with the right honourable member's suggestion. So the invitation is there, and I think that will be a very good starting place, because ultimately the only justice that can be secured is justice that involves the women themselves. Yeah. And I think to start with them and to listen to what they want to propose to government would be a good starting place. But I want to ask the Minister a few questions. Given the prospect of a High Court judicial review, presumably, when issuing its decision not to compensate, the government must, if it's been acting diligently, carried out a legal risk assessment of the prospect of success of potential future legal action. If that's the case, will the Minister place before the House a copy of that legal advice so that we can see what the government considered at that time? And will he also outline his remarks in relation to whether he accepts whether the Ombudsman's proposal to ask ministers and MPs to intervene within this place to ensure justice is delivered, and whether he agrees that it would be prudent for the government to make time for a parliamentary debate so that MPs across this House can have a vote on this issue on a non-partisan basis, as was intimated by the Ombudsman. And then finally, will the Minister look again at the case for compensation? As I've stressed, I don't believe it's his intention to undermine democracy, nor is that the intention of government. And now, given the prospect of legal action, it would be an opportune time for the Minister to meet the groups that are campaigning on behalf of women and look at the different compensation mechanisms and mediation proposals that have been suggested. Thank you.
John Milne.
Stringer, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Last November, as a member of the Work and Pension Select Committee, I asked Secretary of State Liz Kendall when we could expect to see a decision on compensation for WASPI women. I quote her reply, "There is lots of information to go through. We need to get it right, but I want this resolved as soon as possible." I probed for a timescale, and she said, "If I gave you a date, then I would have it sorted. And it needs to be sorted, but I will do it as soon as humanly possible." No one would have suspected that sorting the issue meant an outright refusal. So where did this shock handbrake turn of a decision come from? I suspect it has more to do with the Treasury than with any objective measure of fairness. In justifying her decision, the Secretary of State made repeated reference to one particular statistic, the DWP survey from 2006, which found that 90% of women understood that the pension age was rising. The Secretary of State repeated this 90% figure like a mantra in her presentation to the House and the media. But this survey was based on a tiny sample of perhaps 170 women who could not possibly be taken as fair representation of the entire female population. Furthermore, this survey was contradicted by multiple other studies conducted both before and after. Research from the following year found that half of women whose pension age had in fact risen to between 60 and 65 still thought it stood at 60. On what grounds did the Secretary of State put so much faith in the 90% figure rather than the 50%? None that I can see, except that it was cherry-picked to support the conclusion that she always wanted to reach in the first place. What's more, it's clear that the DWP itself attached far greater weight to the later survey. An internal memo from April 2007 described the research findings as depressing reading. It continued, "We still have 50% ignorance levels with 3 years to go. The Ombudsman's first question will be, what are you proposing to do about it?" And that turns out to have been a really prescient question. To further justify its decision, the government has also argued that earlier warning letters wouldn't have worked anyway. But writing letters is exactly how much of government communicates to this day. It's sheer nonsense to argue that the standard method of communication across all government departments would have been useless in this one circumstance of WASPy women. I accept there are financial pressures on government. The government could have said, "We accept the Ombudsman's findings, but we are not currently able to respond or not able to meet the full levels suggested." What is not reasonable is to undermine the Ombudsman, a highly unusual and constitutionally worrying move, and to pick through the evidence to support the conclusion that they always wanted to find in the first place. Fundamentally, it was neither safe nor reasonable for the Secretary of State to rely so completely on the 90% claim, to the deliberate exclusion of multiple other statistics which showed a much lower level of awareness. 5,000 women in my own constituency of Horsham have been affected by this decision, and of course many, many more nationwide. So I call upon the government to respect the vital constitutional role of the Ombudsman and to think again. Thank you.
Ewan Steinbank.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I thank the member for South Cotswolds for bringing this debate forward on behalf of the Petitions Committee. Both the Ombudsman and the Secretary of State's response back in December leave no room for doubt. The government failed to adequately notify many 1950s-born women about changes to their pension age. This is maladministration and the scandal that has driven so many to campaign for justice. I invited the WASPy women in Falkirk to meet me after the Secretary of State's statement, and the message I took back from that meeting is that if we in this place believed there was no injustice, compensation would never have been paid, regardless of fiscal circumstances. But if we recognise an injustice, as the Department have now done, we must now deliver a form of the recommended redress of the Ombudsman's findings. I'll ask some questions on behalf of WASPy women in Falkirk that were raised at that meeting back in December that I would like a response, if possible, from the Minister from my constituents. Why can the government pick and choose when to implement Ombudsman recommendations? Is the 90% figure derived from a study specific to women who would have been impacted by the pension changes? And is this decision based on cost or a genuine disagreement with the findings of the Ombudsman? There were further questions asked, but those are questions on behalf of women who attended that meeting. In the October budget, this government did not just promise but delivered for victims of the Horizon scandal, for victims of the infected blood scandal, of the mine workers' pension scheme and for LGBTQ+ veterans. This is a proud record, and I put to the government and I reiterate that we should think again and deliver redress for the WASPy women as well. Thank you, Mr Stringer.
Elaine Long.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd also like to congratulate my honourable friend for introducing the debate so powerfully. WASPy women faced inequalities in the workplace and in finance. Many entered the workforce before the 1975 Sex Discrimination Act. It introduced, at least in theory, equal pay and made it possible for women to get credit cards and loans and other financial products without the support of a man. Statutory maternity pay wasn't introduced until after many had already had their children. And it was only in 1990 that their income was recognised for taxation purposes as their own rather than their husbands. The principle of an equal pension age is right. The issue is the lack of timely notification, denying WASPy women the chance to plan their finances in an informed way. That is yet another injustice for the WASPy women generation, and it's one that has had real consequences. For example, one of my constituents, born in 1955, found out that her state pension age was going to 66 just before her 60th birthday. It was too late to plan any differently, so she ploughed on, but she was forced by leukemia to retire just before her 65th birthday, leading to financial hardship. This was also a generation where caring responsibilities have overwhelmingly fallen to women. And this is illustrated by another of my constituents, who was aiming to retire at 60, in part to help care for her elderly mother. She was denied this opportunity due to the failure to clearly communicate the state pension age changes. As a result, she missed out on being able to care for her dying mother due to needing to work longer. She told me how she would have welcomed a letter giving her enough notice about the changes, as this may have allowed her to plan her finances further ahead, to potentially allow her more time with her mother. And this is an often overlooked factor, the impact the changes have had not only on Wasby women themselves, but also on their family and loved ones, who these women often care for as they get older. And this is something that will only grow as a concern as time goes by. So to conclude, there is clear evidence of injustice, and I urge the government to listen to the Ombudsman's decision and address that injustice as promised.
Alison Hume.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, Mr Stringer. I'd like to congratulate the member for South Cotswolds for her powerful opening remarks. According to the latest figures, there are 7,160 women in Scarborough and Whitby affected by the various acts which made changes to women's state pension age. As a candidate standing in Scarborough and Whitby, I pledge to support Wasby women, and as a MP, I rise today to speak for them. I sympathise with their anger and frustration. In her statement to the House in December, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions said that most women knew that their state pension age was increasing. That may well have been the case. I have no way of telling. But I've been contacted by so many constituents who have told me that they were not aware of the changes to their state pension age. And the reasons are ones that I can think that we all understand. My constituent Kirsty was living in Spain when the letters were sent from the DWP, so was totally unaware of the pension age increase. Another of my constituents told me that she only heard about the changes through a friend whilst looking after her dad, who was suffering from dementia. I will give way.
And the Honourable Lady, the Honourable Lady is probably aware, I'm sure the whole House is aware of the fact that the Women Against State Pension Inequality have received 7,607 requests with £132,000 to take for the judicial review. 77,000 Wasby women in Northern Ireland, 6,000 in my constituency who want justice for them. Does the Honourable Lady agree it would be in the best interest of government and the Minister to ensure that they had a meeting with the women to finally negotiate a satisfactory outcome to avoid the costs of a judicial review and justice being given to the Wasby women, which they richly deserve?
I thank the honourable member for his comments. As always, he's making a powerful point for his constituents, and I support his wider call for the government to think again. And talking about my constituent who is looking after her father who is suffering from dementia, had she been aware of the changes, she would have increased her personal pension contribution and saved more money to enable her to retire sooner to look after her dad, who's since passed away. The carer's allowance simply was not enough to live on and pay for food and other essential bills. And her experience for caring for an elderly parent is very common amongst women in their 50s and 60s, and I have been there myself. And it is extremely likely that many other women in that situation will have been preoccupied with coping with the day-to-day challenges that carers face and will not have known about the change to their state pension age. Another constituent of mine had to sell her home of 36 years after she lost her husband, as she thought she would receive her state pension at 60 and had planned for the future under the impression that this would be the case. Now, obviously, she acknowledges that even without the changes, there's no guarantee she could have remained in her home, but all the calculations that she and her husband did indicated that she would be all right.
Many others had to work longer than they had anticipated. Others had to dip into their life savings and change their retirement plans after years of working hard and looking forward to life beyond work. Now, I acknowledge the action that the government is taking to tackle the long-standing problems with carers allowance, which previous governments failed to address. The increase in the state pension this April will make a tangible difference to the lives of many women in Scarborough and Whitby. And I do acknowledge that the previous government failed to set aside a single penny for any compensation, as well as leaving behind a black hole in the public's finances, which I appreciate constrains the ability of this government to offer compensation. Nevertheless, I will give way.
I thank the honourable friend for giving way. Will she agree with me that the implicit argument by ministers in this debate that they would rather spend this money on other issues is producing an incredibly slippery slope when it comes to delivering justice for government maladministration, and is giving the impression that we might be moving towards a situation where we means test justice?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I will continue. I think it is important that that as a Labour government we recognise the impact that the failure of the DWP to communicate the change effectively has had on people like my constituents. And I would urge the Minister, could we please look again at giving compensation that will in some way acknowledge that WASPI women have lost out on so much more than money.
Yeah, Alistair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to again serve under your chairmanship. Surely the abiding question that arises from this debacle is, what's the point in having an ombudsman if, when maladministration is found, it can be swept aside and ignored? Why have we an ombudsman? Governments make mistakes. Governments get things wrong. People think governments get things wrong, so people want to complain. So what do? We set up an independent ombudsman. Why? Because government should not be judging its own cause. That's the whole purpose and ethos of having an ombudsman. But in this case, the outcome is that this government wants to be judge in the government's cause. And we're not talking about some incidental, slight illustration of maladministration. Let's remind ourselves what the Ombudsman found. Found that some women lost opportunities to make informed decisions about their finances, which diminished their sense of personal autonomy and financial control, and therefore led to injustice. We are talking about injustice. We're not just talking about maladministration. And when we talk about injustice, then it's an injustice needs to be rectified. And to find government saying, we apologise, and frankly the sincerity of that apology is weighed in the balance of the refusal to compensate. It's not just a matter of saying we're sorry, it's a matter of putting it right. That's what you do when you find an injustice. You try to put it right. And what does the government do in this case? Well, we've had the most spurious attempt to repudiate the findings of the Ombudsman by telling us, oh, well, only 1 in 4 people actually read unsolicited letters from DWP. What was the point in sending them then? You might as well save the postage. It really is pathetic that government have reached the stage of saying to women that the independent ombudsman says weren't just wronged, but an injustice was visited upon them. It really is appalling that government says nothing to see here, nothing to do here, we're doing nothing about it. And I do say to this government, it is not a sign of weakness to admit you're wrong. It's a sign of strength. And rather than hide behind the huge majority that the government has in this House, they would rise in the estimation of many if they exercised the strength of saying, we've got this wrong. Yes?
The honourable gentleman is making an extremely powerful case about righting an injustice, about the importance for our parliamentary system of following the recommendations of an ombudsman. But would he also agree that the reason why the government revisiting this will strengthen our democracy is because we've heard just how strong the cross-party consensus is today, and including notably from many Labour members, as well as members of other parties, referring to the pledges we made in the election? Isn't that why it's so important to restore faith in democracy that the government thinks again?
This goes to the very heart of public confidence in our system of government. I started by saying governments get things wrong. People think they get things wrong, so government has an independent arbitrator. But you can't have an independent arbitrator and then throw their findings in the bin. And that's what's happening here. So yes, it does go to the very heart of the confidence in government and in the system of government, whichever party it is, that if a maladministration of this magnitude is found, then there must be recompense to those to whom the injustice was wrought. And I say to the government, many of your backbenchers are saying loud and clear to you, it's time to rethink. And it certainly is time to rethink. And in that there is strength. And I say on behalf of the 77,000 WASPI women in Northern Ireland, with the rest of this United Kingdom, it is beyond time even for you to rethink. It is time to put right the wrong that was done to all these women. Thank you.
I am calling the last backbench person now, and then we will move to the front bench, starting with the Lib Dem spokesman. Mohammed Yassin.
Thank you so much. It's an honour to serve your chairmanship, sir. I thank all those who signed the e-petition that had led to this important debate. I have long supported the WASPI campaign and will continue to offer my support. The WASPI women have been repeatedly let down by decisions made under Conservative governments. So I welcome the government's apology for the maladministration that led to the delay in notifying 1950s-born women about the increase in state pension age. Accountability and redress for those failing is essential. A nearly 6 years investigation from the Public Health Service Ombudsman found an urgent need for a remedy and took the rare but necessary step of laying its report before Parliament. It is in our hands. I recognise this is a very difficult issue for a government that inherited a country in deep distress with public services and economy in dire straits. So I have sympathy with the government's argument that a flat rate compensation scheme may not be justified. But I firmly believe there should be more effort to explore alternative remedies. One of my constituents wrote, "Acknowledgement and apology are of no use to us, and even less to the thousands of women who died during this process." After her pension age was moved once, she assumed that was the end. But in 2011, David Cameron moved it again, a year after she had planned to retire and already left work. The impact on our life has been significant. WASPI women understand that any compensation would be for maladministration, not lost pensions.
On that point, thank you, Smile, for giving way. I have a constituent who fully believed that justice would be done, to the extent that she had said that she had wanted to put that compensation money aside for her own funeral. Of course, that has now not happened. I have 6,000 plus WASPI women in my constituency, all relying on me to speak up for them. And I want to say today that I will continue to support and look out for them and raise their stories here so that their voices are heard. Do you agree with me that we need to find a way to seek some justice for these women?
I thank the honourable friend for his...
In the chair to agree or not to agree with you. If the honourable member can remember to use the normal... Thank you. Mohammed Yassin.
I thank my colleague for his intervention. I wholeheartedly agree with his view. And I will continue. The support pension equity, but not having their retirement plans disrupted by government's maladministration. I believe there is a strong case for offering compensation to the worst affected women, given the severe hardship many have endured as a result of this failure. The pension triple lock does not address the losses faced by many 1950s-born women who, due to familial responsibilities, often do not receive a full state pension and benefit less than men. An injustice has occurred, and it is now a matter of principle to uphold the remedy recommendations of the PHSO report. There is room for debate about what a compensation remedy would look like, and the women in my constituency who have supported on this issue for years are open to alternative solutions. Some, for instance, would accept compensation payments over time through a scheduling agreement. The WASPI women have been respectful, resolute, and very patient, even when they are at a stage in life where there is more time behind them than ahead. For many, it is too late. Let's revisit this issue and find a remedy. Focus on what we can do, not on what we can't. Thank you.
The Lib Dem spokesperson, Steve Darling.
Thank you, Chair, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd first of all like to pay tribute to the member for South Cotswold and the stellar speech that she shared with us to launch the debate this evening. And it's the first debate that I've spoken to that has been triggered by a petition. And the fact that this has been driven so swiftly by the force of nature that is WASPI women is nothing but, one can only acknowledge how excellent campaigners they've been over many years, and their patience has been worn thin, Chair. I would also like to highlight that, as colleagues have already alluded to, that sadly a WASPI woman dies every 13 minutes. During the course of this debate that is set for 3 hours, that means that 14 WASPI women will have sadly died without receiving the compensation that they so richly deserve. In my own constituency of Torbay, there are 6,930 WASPI women who deserve the support that the government could give them. Across the United Kingdom, there are 3.7 million WASPI women. That is more than 500,000 than the population of Wales. So it is an enormous amount of people who could be benefiting from this compensation that they so richly deserve. I'm reflecting to myself, Chair, that many of us are new MPs in the chamber here this evening. And when I got elected, as I'm sure a number of people reflect to themselves, the most important thing that we needed to achieve was rebuilding trust between the public and politicians, because we see elsewhere in Western Europe and North America what happens when trust is broken and extremists take power. So we must rebuild the trust. We saw what happened under the last government, where many of us stayed at home and did the right thing and others partied at number 10. And that broken trust needs rebuilding, and this before us today is potentially part of that rebuilding of trust. Colleagues from across the chamber have highlighted many heartbreaking stories this afternoon. The time has flown by as we've heard those from across the United Kingdom. I'd like to particularly highlight the contribution made by the member for Horsham, where he does highlight how the Minister picked on a particular issue that actually held no water at all. And I would hope that the Minister would return to that when reflecting. Pam, in my own constituency, she believed that she was set to retire at a certain age. She spent time supporting a husband who was dying from terminal cancer, supporting a mother who was elderly and frail, and she has been let down, as many women has throughout the United Kingdom. I'd like now, Mr. Chairman, to reflect on the Ombudsman report. And we hear from people who are currently queuing up to say the DWP is broken, it's not fit for purpose. Well, I think that this report highlights that that is the case. Mr. Chairman, I wonder if the Minister could reflect on the quangos that seem to be somewhat out of fashion with the government at the moment. And is this particular Ombudsman one that you will consider actually abolishing? Because if you're choosing to ignore it this easily, what's the point of the Ombudsman? So I hope we can get some reassurances around that. The fact that the Minister stood up in the chamber, Mr. Chairman, and said that she accepts that there was maladministration, she apologises, but she will not give compensation, is bizarre in the extreme. And we need to build that trust again with our communities. I'm very much alive, Mr. Chairman, that WASPI women only this afternoon have lodged paperwork in the High Court for a judicial review on this very issue. And that could take 6 months, it could take 14 months to come to fruition. But why drag this out further? Let us not have the indignity of the government being dragged to the right decision through kicking and screaming, but do the right thing now, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Conservative spokesperson Danny Kruger.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve under you, and my thanks and appreciation to the member for South Cotswolds, my Wiltshire near neighbour, for her very powerful speech representing the many thousands of people who have written in and supported this petition. I also pay tribute to our visitors, many of whom I detect might qualify as WASPI women. And I want to echo the point made by the honourable gentleman who just spoke about the power of this campaign. It is an absolute demonstration of what people power can do to get the attention of Parliament. And I very much hope that they feel that this debate today has advanced their cause. We'll hear from the Minister shortly about whether that has happened. And I want to pay tribute to speeches made by honourable members across the chamber. I agree with members who pointed out the cross-party nature of our efforts here, and it's been very powerful to see, particularly the friendship between the members for Salford and for South Holland and the Deepings. It's a moving sight, Mr. Stringer. They are the conscience and the soul of our respective parties. And I hope the Minister will listen to his colleague just as I listen to mine. Now, Mr. Stringer, in a sense, the question is a complex one. I do recognise that. And the government has had a difficult time in thinking about what to do. It is true that, as the report has pointed out from the Ombudsman, that there was no direct loss of income to women because of the maladministration, but it is also true, as many members have powerfully expressed on behalf of individual constituents, that the bad communication of the policy change did lead directly to people being negatively affected in their income, to making decisions in the absence of full information from government about what their future income would be. And it is true that there was communication, and it is true that the whole question of how to communicate with individual members of the public is a fraught one. But it is simply not credible in my view, that the communications were adequate for this group. And as the member for North Antrim powerfully pointed out, if the government is also saying at the same time that there's very little point in sending letters because people don't open them anyway, what is the point of making those sorts of communications on any topic from government to the public. It is also true, just last defence of the government as it were, that it's a complex matter when you're dealing with 3.5 million people, all of whom have different circumstances. And I recognise how difficult it is and how enormous the potential bill could have been for the taxpayer if every single one of those women were to be compensated to the maximum possible. So while I say it is complicated, it is really fundamentally very simple. And I think honourable members have made the point more powerfully than I can. The simple fact is that Labour MPs campaigned to fix this problem, to right the wrongs that had been done to the WASPI women, and to, if they won election, to see justice done. And that has not happened. And as members have said very powerfully, our democracy depends on we MPs fulfilling the promises that we make when we stand for election. And if we don't do that, we have a bigger problem than the injustice done to the WASPI women. Our whole democracy is in crisis. Now, speaking of pledges made and the election, I recognise more could have been done by the last Conservative government before the election. But we were waiting for the Ombudsman's report. And the suggestion that we kicked into the long grass, I think, is a little unfair, Mr Stringer. The fact is that report arrived a matter of weeks before the general election was called. And I am confident, as my party made clear pledges, that we would have fulfilled our commitment to the WASPI women in light of the Ombudsman's report. Exactly what, I can't promise, I can't say from this position. Sadly, we didn't, no one will ever know what we would have done, because the public took a different view about who should take that question forward. Nevertheless, I can say with absolute candour and confidence that we would have done more than nothing, which is what the Labour government have done. So, but leaving party politics out of it, I want to just echo the point made by the Honourable Member for Edinburgh West, when she said that this is a matter for Parliament. It was a Parliamentary Ombudsman's report, and it's Parliament that decides on these matters. And I also, like her, take hope from the very many excellent and powerful and brave speeches made by Labour members in the Chamber today, and many others who have stood in public and pledged their opposition to the decision made by their own party leadership. I honour them for those commitments that they are making to honour the pledges that they made when they stood as candidates. And I really do, I do very much hope that the Minister will be listening. Happy to give way.
Mr Chairman, I've been a backbencher all my life. I have no wish to be anything other than a backbencher. I'm very happy in the role that I play. The backbenchers over there are playing an absolutely magnificent role. I think they should be congratulated and should be very proud of the stance that they've taken. Every one of them has spoken in support of the WASPI women, and we thank them for that. There's more than those backbenchers that are committed to doing the same thing. So I looked to the Minister, I seen him nodding in support of them. I think his head went up and down, so I think I was agreeing with what they were saying. If that's the case, does he agree that the Minister can only do one thing? It's meet the WASPI woman before the judicial review makes him do something which he made today decide he should have done long ago.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, the greatest backbencher in the House of Commons, without a doubt, and I very much agree with what he's saying, and I reiterate my appreciation and respect for colleagues across the House, but particularly those Labour members who have spoken today and in other places in support of the WASPI women. And let me finish with this specific question to the Minister. When we stood here a couple of months ago, it was his first day in the job, and by the way, we should not be blaming him for the policy, coming up with the policy. He was a backbencher when the policy was conceived. He just had to come out and defend it, which he has done. But he said on that day, in the debate we had on this topic, that, I quote, "We will work with the Ombudsman to develop a detailed action plan identifying and addressing lessons from this and other PHSO investigations." So I'd be grateful if he could tell us what progress has been made on this matter and what action plan we can expect. What update can he provide? And will he, as the honourable gentleman just said, I hope very much he'll be working closely with WASPI women themselves and their representatives to develop that action plan. This battle is not over. There's a case in the High Court, as we've just heard, but it remains, the opportunity, Parliament remains powerful enough and has the authority and the ability to right the injustice that has been done over so many years to these women. I very much hope that the Minister, who, as I say, cannot be blamed for conceiving of this policy, having heard the very powerful speeches that have been made across the House, being aware of the strength of feeling in our constituencies, might feed back to his colleagues in government that a mistake has been made and the opportunity still remains to right that injustice. Thank you.
Minister to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve under you today, and I want to thank the honourable member for the South Cotswolds for leading today's debate on behalf of the Petitions Committee, and I look forward to her closing remarks. Now, questions of when each of us can draw our pension are hugely important. So are related questions about how we spend our latter years, including when we can retire. And it's not surprising, therefore, that this petition has garnered so many signatures, nor that this debate has brought so many spectators and honourable members to this hall. Now, of course, none of us need to come here to have those conversations, exactly because they matter so much. We have them every week. I've declared an interest on this issue before. My aunt in Aberystwyth certainly sees herself as a WASPy woman. And just 2 weeks ago, I met Georgina Kettleborough at Burleigh Primary School. She supported over 3 decades worth of children in the canteen and throughout the school. And at the age of 69, she is about to retire. I hope we can all join in congratulating her on that milestone, as we congratulate the honourable member's mother on her birthday. Her retirement comes after several years after she was entitled to her state pension, because working in the school is such a big part of her life. But you won't be surprised to know that she would certainly have preferred to have received her pension earlier. Everyone will understand that. Who wouldn't feel that way, especially a generation of women that suffered such significant disadvantage in the labour market and elsewhere, exactly as the honourable members for Moray West and North East Hampshire spelt out. But of course, the Ombudsman did not investigate the Conservative government's decision to increase the state pension age for women in 1995, or that of the Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition government to accelerate those increases in 2011. And I make this point because it is the desirability of those original decisions that several members, including my right honourable friend from Northampton and Hemsworth, have referred to. Now, this isn't to downplay the significance of those decisions. Far from it. SPA equalisation was a very large and important change. The acceleration was something opposed by my party for the reasons set out by my honourable friend from Glasgow West. But the Ombudsman did not investigate the legality or merits of those decisions. Instead, and as I should note, the WASPy campaign are clear on this point, the sole focus was on how those changes were communicated by the Department for Work and Pensions. Now, the Ombudsman looked at 6 cases, which they said reflected the range of issues and the injustices raised. They concluded that the DWP provided adequate and accurate information on changes to the state pension age between 1995 and 2004. However, they also found that decisions made between 2005 and 2007 led to a 28-month delay in sending out letters to women born in the 1950s. The Ombudsman says these delays were maladministration, as almost every member speaking today has reiterated. We respect the work of the Ombudsman and their independence and the work they do, a point many members have raised. In this case, we agree that the letters should have been sent sooner. We have apologised. We will learn the lessons. And as everyone in this room is well aware, we do not, however, agree with the Ombudsman's approach to injustice or remedy. Now, many members have raised the question about whether that invalidates the role of the Ombudsman, including the Right Honourable Member for Salford. My view strongly is that it does not. It is rightly rare, but not unprecedented, for a government to take this view. Now, 2 important considerations when making this decision were that the evidence shows sending people unsolicited letters can be ineffective, which is why it's part of a wider communication campaign and every issue where it is used today. And the majority of 1950s born women were aware that the state pension age was changing, if not on their specific state pension age. The Ombudsman assumed that sending letters earlier would have changed what women knew and how they acted. But research from 20... Of course.
Can you please explain your assertion that the majority of women were aware of these changes?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Member for that intervention. I'll come to exactly that point shortly. But the research, the 2014 research, was not properly considered by the Ombudsman. The same research is now the subject of live litigation, as the Honourable Member for Bradford East noted. In addition, there was considerable awareness that the state pension age was increasing. Research used by the Ombudsman from 2004 shows that 73% of people then aged 45 to 54 were aware the state pension age was going up. Further research from 2006 reinforced this finding and was also given to and used by the Ombudsman. Now, the Honourable Member for Eastleigh, I will answer this question, then I'll give way. The Honourable Member for Eastleigh focused on the widely used 43% figure, but that figure refers to all women, including some of those aged 16 at the time of the survey, not those who were affected by the state pension age changes.
Christine Jardine.
I appreciate the Minister giving way, and I take on board what he's saying about the research. But the fact is 73% of people knew that there were going to be changes to the pension age does not tell us that 73% of women knew that it was going to affect them, or that any percentage of women knew that it was going to affect them. That's not what the evidence tells us.
Well, the fact that people were widely aware that the state pension age was rising is indicative that this was not news to most people, even if they hadn't got to the details of what their specific circumstances was. Now, the 2006 research is now also the subject of live litigation, so I will resist the temptation to dive into the details beyond directly addressing the point raised by the Honourable Member for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East regarding the sample size used in that survey. Now, the confidence intervals provided in that, and I'm returning to my old expertise in this area, are certainly small enough to make clear that a clear majority were aware that the state pension age was changing. So I don't think it's right to cast aspersions on that survey. Of course.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. One of the data sets that the government relies upon to make its assertions, specifically the 90% figure, actually includes women who weren't born in the 1950s. So can he give us an exact figure as to how many women in that 90% category responded to that survey?
The 90% figure refers to the age group that best overlaps with women born in the 1950s. So that is the best that is available from that survey. No, I'm going to make some progress because I've given the best answer I can to the Honourable Lady's question. Now, the Ombudsman is clear that redress and compensation should normally reflect individual impact, but also acknowledges the challenges of assessing individual circumstances of 3.5 million women, as recognised by the member for East Wiltshire a few moments ago. It took the Ombudsman nearly 6 years to look at just 6 cases. Doing so for millions would take years and thousands of DWP staff. In answer to the question by the Honourable Member for Bedford, we considered a range of options for compensation for those women who did lose opportunities as a result of the delay in sending letters. For example, we considered rules-based schemes such as the Work and Pension Select Committee suggested. We also considered the possibility of paying limited compensation to a smaller group of women, for example, those on pension credit, as suggested by the Honourable Member for Eastleigh. However, many of these schemes would mean compensating women who were aware that the state pension age was increasing. Payments would not be related directly to the injustice in question, but to benefit entitlement or to the timeline of the policy change itself. And paying a flat rate to all 3.5 million women, regardless of whether they suffered injustice, would be neither fair nor proportionate. Nor would it be affordable when such compensation schemes would cost up to 10.5 billion questions. But to directly address the question, I'm going to get 1 second, yes, but to directly address the question, the Honourable Member for Falkirk, the decision made by the government was not driven purely on the grounds of cost.
Andy MacDonald.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way. He's listed a whole host of alternatives, but can he answer, is it fair to ignore the Ombudsman's clear conclusion that compensation ought to be paid? And is it fair to do nothing?
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. I just want to say the government has not ignored the Ombudsman's report or their judgment. We've just come to a different conclusion for the detailed reasons. But I appreciate in this room I'm not going to persuade lots of members for the very reason they've chosen to come today. But on the direct question asked by the honourable member, the government did not ignore their questions. We've come to a different view for the reasons I've set out on the basis of the research I've mentioned. Now, Chair, I've set out the grounds for the government's decision. I appreciate none of this is likely to change the minds of many members here, or of the campaigners whose tenacity no one disputes and that the honourable member for Torquay paid tribute to. I fully recognise the challenges this cohort of women have faced, working hard in sexist workplaces and often balancing that with raising a family. We do have a responsibility to listen to their concerns, and that is why my predecessor, the Honourable Member for Wickham, was the first minister in 8 years to meet the WASPI campaign. And it is why, of course.
Steve Darling.
Thank you. Will the Minister advise us whether he has had a conversation with the Ombudsman about what a just compensation system could look like?
Minister.
My predecessor that I've just mentioned did meet with the Ombudsman prior to the decision being announced by this government. And I was just going on to say that Parliament has also been very engaged in this issue, as has been on display today, but was also on display in January when, in a debate led by the Honourable Member for South Holland and the Deepings. Now, the government has made its decision, and it is right that government holds us accountable for it, as the Honourable Member made the case so powerfully just now, and as wider speakers have done throughout this debate.
Jim Shannon.
Minister, the judicial review is pending. It's like a Damocles sword hanging over the head of the Minister and over the head of... Does the Minister fear the judicial review that will bring him screeching, perhaps, to give the WASPI women the compensation and the justice that they deserve?
Minister.
I thank him for that intervention, but I suspect that was a statement rather than a question, because he knows the government is not going to comment on a live. He's not going to comment on a live litigation. But to answer some of the questions raised by the members, I will of course be happy to meet with the chairs of the APBG, subject to the constraints of that live legal case. Now, Chair, as a department, I've said we must and we will learn the lessons from this case, and we will in the months ahead. Well, I'm just wrapping up.
Christine Jardine.
I thank the Minister for giving way, but he says that they will learn the lessons of this place. Would he accept that the whole point of this debate was not, as he said, to change the minds of the members who spoke or the women who've come to see, but to change the mind of the government? And that is the lesson we'd like him to learn.
I fully understand the motivation of those that have come here today isn't just to keep their constituents happy, but it's to make the cases that they've come to. But I've also set out today why the government has come to a different view, and that is the nature of a government that makes a decision, but then is rightly held to account for it. That is what I think honourable members have done today. That is what I have endeavoured to engage in, and that I think is the right way forward. So thank you, Chair.
Dr. Ross Savage, to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. It has been an honour to take part in this debate with you in the chair. This issue affects women from across the country, and it has been enormously encouraging, I hope I speak on behalf of the WASPI women here, to see members from the length and breadth of the United Kingdom and across all parties taking part today and speaking out with one voice, unanimously, calling for the government to do the morally and what may well turn out to be the legally right thing in this situation, and to compensate the WASPI women for the injustice that they have suffered. I want to commiserate with the Minister who's been sent out today to defend the indefensible and attempt to put the Secretary of State in the best possible light. I applaud your efforts. And I want to finish today... Sorry, I appreciate the Minister's efforts. My apologies, Mr. Stringer. I want to finish today's debate by again thanking the petitioners, as we're here today on their behalf, and without them, this powerful campaign would not have gained such widespread public support. I hope that today's debate has shown the WASPI women that they have the support of many, many members from across the House, and that many of us here are committed to support them beyond this debate and until justice is done and seen to be done.
Yeah. The question is that this House has considered e-petition 700765 relating to compensation for women affected by state pension changes. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.